Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So for today's card we're going to create a galaxy background. I don't often do these, so I just I kind of wing it, and I have to always look up how to do these. So I did that. I just checked out a couple of YouTube videos, and I've got some Bristol smooth cardstock, or a smooth cardstock. Different cardstocks will do different things, so again, as with anything, when you're ink blending, just try different cardstocks to see what happens. But for this one I've got some picked raspberry, mustard seed, peacock feathers, seedless preserves, blueprint sketch, chipped sapphire, and black soot distress oxides. And as you can see, I'm just doing a random pattern. Now it is going to look like a hot mess, and it will be a hot mess, but you have to trust the process. It will suddenly look like a galaxy background by the time you're finished with it. So just like I say, trust the process, keep going, don't get too hung up on anything. At this point I've worked from, I kind of have like this rainbow of colors, and then I'm getting darker and darker, and I'm just filling in the gaps so there's no white space on that piece of cardstock. And then the final bit, once you're mostly happy with that, is to go over the whole thing with black soot. Or black soot in this case. I've seen people do this with watercolor paints as well, so you can do it in a number of different ways. And then there were a few areas that I wanted to sort of highlight again, like the yellow and the pinky, and that sort of peacock feathers color. So I went back over, and because oxides sit on top of each other, it works really well. So I just went back with a few more colors, and then the black soot, I believe. But I gotta say, I actually think I needed more black soot on this. I don't feel like there was enough of a layer of black over the top, but it still works out okay. It's fine. We're gonna go with it. The next stage for me is to spritz it with water. So I use a distress sprayer because that for me gives me different types of splatter and different sizes, and that straight away for me looks more galaxy like, just in that 5 seconds. And that was made a big difference, because I wasn't sure about the background piece to start with. And then just drying this off with a heat tool, and that's sort of stage one, if you like, of this for me. So the next thing I wanted to do, I tried some, I know it sounds weird, but I tried some alcohol over the top of it just to get it to react, and that didn't do anything. And then I grabbed some Perfect Pearls in Perfect Pearls, and this it's in a different mister, and so it gave a much more fine mist over the top, but it also added that shimmer, so it gave it more of a galaxy look, or what I imagine, because you know, I don't know anything about space really. So the next thing I wanted to do was add some black and white splatter. Now I think if you had a thinner paint, like a distress paint, that would be better. I had to actually work both of these. These are just regular acrylic paints. That was what I had in black and white. So I just used them and I watered them down. A couple of things though, with the white one I have a fairly large brush, which I think didn't help when it comes to the splatter. So as much as I kept having to water down the white paint, I think the size of the brush made a big difference, because when I get to the black paint, and they're the same company, so the same brand, pretty much the same consistency of paint as well, for some reason when I used the smaller brush with the black paint, it seemed to, and the water, it seemed to splatter better. So it was just looser for some reason. Could be that my paints are just really old. It could be that as well. So in the end, with the white paint, I chucked some on a acrylic block and then flicked it off the edge of the acrylic block, and that gave me some different like splatters or splotches of paint, which I actually quite like, so I went with it. And then again, adding in the black paint in the same sort of way. Honestly, I had this paint everywhere. You'll see in a second, I'll actually try and wipe my lens of my camera, because it landed up on my lens, and I was like, oh my god. So yeah, it's splatter, it's gonna go everywhere. I don't use a splat box that often because it's hard to actually film the way that my camera is at the moment, so getting a splat box underneath is not underneath my camera it's not very easy. So I did, once it was dry, I did cut it down using the Waffle Flowers A2 layers dies, I think they're called, and there's like huge amount of different layer dies, but I used the biggest one, which is an A2 size, and then I used some navy cardstock and made an A2 size card, which I'm going to just stick this flat to the front of this card base. So super easy. And when you're experimenting with backgrounds and stuff like that, I would suggest starting with a bigger piece like I did. You can always cut them down, you can't make them bigger, right? So I think starting with a larger piece is always better. You can always use that whole piece as a large piece, but I just think it's easier than to trim it down if your edges aren't right or something like that. Now, because I was thinking I needed more black soot on here, I just went around the edges just to deepen the edge, and that kind of made it almost like glow in the middle. It's not glowing obviously, but it almost has this sort of like, because the edges are darker, it's given it this sort of more like the inside's brighter. Maybe not glowing, but you know what I mean. So, and then for this stamped images, I'm using Out of This World from Fawn, and I've already stamped and colored these with some Copic markers off camera, and then got them cut out with my Scan and Cut. And I did forget one little planet, but I'm not going to worry. I believe it's Pluto in the stamp set, but I didn't worry. I had enough there, so I wasn't going to go back and stamp one little dude and then have to cut him out, drag my machine out for that. So I didn't worry. And then I've grabbed 3 sentiments and a piece of the same color navy cardstock. This navy cardstock, I believe, is Stampin' Up! Night of Navy. And then I'm going to use some of the oxide inks that I've been using to create the background. I'm gonna, because oxide will sit on top of the paper, it's kind of like that combination of pigment and dye. I thought it would just work quite nicely on dark cardstock, which it does. In real life you can see it a bit better, on camera not so much, but I think that's also partly because of my for some reason my camera can't cope with white backgrounds, so because I'm using the medium and it's sort of freaking out a bit, so so apologies, but in real life you can see it much better. Although you could heat set it with white white embossing powder, or you could even heat set these with some clear embossing powder if you wanted to go down that route, or you could just use a lighter shade of cardstock. You could use maybe a white piece of cardstock, stamp in the different colors, and then use one of the other colors to sort of go around the edge, maybe even the black soot around the edge, just to sort of, so that it's not that stark white panel on top of your, or like sentiment block, I suppose is what you call it. I don't know, I'm making stuff up now. Anyway, so I just trimmed it down with my paper trimmer. And I left the wider, because there's a couple of the sentiments are sort of a smaller script, and one of them is larger, so the larger one fits nicely within that blue cardstock that I trimmed down for the sentiments, but the other two are much narrower and much smaller text, so they kind of sit in the middle with lots more blue around it. So I'll show you how I'm going to fix that, and also so that it draws your eye into the sentiments as well. So I'm just arranging these guys on all the different planets and the sun and all that on the galaxy, in the galaxy, far away. Anyway, and then I thought that what I would do is, instead of taking them all off to then stick them back on, because I had placement where I wanted them, I would just stick as I went. That way I don't have to, I can still move them if I want to move them slightly in or out or whatever, but I am also not having to try and remember where they got to go. So this is just a tip for anything like this, where you're creating like a little scene or a you're trying to figure out where you want all your pieces to go on the front of your card, is to just lay them out and then like glue or stick or whatever you want to call it as you go, so that you don't have to rethink where everything goes. The other thing you could do is, if you've set up a whole load of images and you don't want them to move, or they're on top of each other and behind each other, then you could use something called press and seal, which is like a low tack kind of seal thing. It's a Glad product, and you could use a piece of that to sort of almost like temporarily pick all those pieces up, so you can then flip it over and put adhesive on the back and then re-stick them, and then you can peel that sort of temporary what did I call it, press and seal off once everything's stuck down. So my little astronaut, he's popped up. I thought that made sense for him to be popped up. Now this is where I was like, I don't really like the sentiments. So I like the wording on the sentiments, but I don't like the way that they are working out for me, because I cover up too many of the planets that I spent quite a long time colouring in and trying to get right, because I'm still not great with that. So in the end I put 2 of them on the outside and 1 of them will go on the inside. As it turns out, I don't lose too much of the 2 planets in the top because they're still sticking out from behind the sentiment strips. So in the end I was happier with that. I just didn't want to lose not only the background but also where all the planets were. I felt like it was losing too much by putting all these sentiments on there, although I wanted the sentiments on there, if that made sense. So this long strip of sentiment I put on the inside, which actually works well and makes sense because it's like the second half of the sentiment. So what I did to highlight that, because obviously it's the same color cardstock as the card base, is I used a white Sakura gel pen and just do some dots or lines, like little stitch lines. When I first started crafting, everybody did this on everything, so it's not a new technique by no means. And then I decided to do the same around the other sentiments, because I figured that way it will draw your eye into the sentiments, but it also then separates them from the rest of the card, so they don't get too sort of lost in the background, because they're not sort of stark white. This is where, like here, it doesn't look like you can really read the sentiment, but in reality it's a lot clearer. You can see it better. But a white, I could have used a white pigment ink as well. That would probably work quite well, because it will give it that sort of not totally clear, what's the word I'm looking for, sort of a little bit out of, I don't know, like a chalky look almost. Anyway, so I then took a Nouveau Aqua Shimmer pen, and I don't get on very well with my pen because it I don't know, just can't get the stuff out of it for some reason, over some of the planets and only parts of the planets, just so that there's a little bit of shimmer in the background. Again, it just adds to it. And then I was going to use some glossy accents, and I had to switch to my Nouveau Crystal Glaze because my glossy accents for some reason was blocked. So don't know why, but I'll have to fix that. It's not, I can't not use it, it's just a bit blocked. So that's pretty much it. There's a very sparkly, shimmery, well, it's not sparkly, it's more shimmery background, and a galaxy background that, like I say, I don't make them often, and I still think this could have been a bit darker, but I think it worked out okay. It seems okay. And it says, "You are out of this world." And then the inside says, "Today is all about you," or something. I can't remember. Anyway, so I hope you've enjoyed this, guys, and I hope that you try and create a galaxy background yourself. Like I say, the paper will depend on how your inks flow on it. That's just a rule across the board, but try different things, and I hope you enjoy this, and I will see you next time.